we have been doing it for so long now that of course it's going to look easy, but a lot of times we're messing up and it still takes us a few attempts.
Hey, I'm Becca with the Happy Ever Crafter, and today I am joined by Veronica of Veronica Letters.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
And today Veronica is going to be showing us 3 fun and easy lettering techniques, which we'll get into in a minute. But just before we get started, I want to remind everybody, as I always do, that if you're watching this within the first 24 hours of it going live, make sure you leave a comment down below and you'll be entered automatically to win a set of brush pens. So make sure you've done that. And yeah, but other than that, I think we should just jump right in. So Veronica, for anybody who somehow doesn't know who you are, can you give us a little rundown of who you are, what you do, and maybe how you got into all of this stuff?
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I'm at Veronica Letters on Instagram. I got into lettering about 2015 when I was in college. I took graphic design classes, and of course, we had a course on lettering and old school logo design. And I fell in love and literally just dove in and just started practicing my cursive at the time before I really could figure out the difference between lettering, calligraphy, and all that. And using just books I found at the bookstores and online tutorials, I just literally practiced every day, and that's how I got here today.
And so you practiced for a while and then started your Instagram account and it just blew up. Is that what happened?
Yeah, I was practicing for about a year on my own, and then I had like a personal Instagram, and I used to be more into drawing and illustrating, but that wasn't really giving me much excitement anymore. Like I found more passion with letters. And then one day I just decided to post something. Just I literally did, I think, like a letter A and like a small little piece of lettering that I was like, okay, I feel confident I could post this and I won't like be too scared about it. And little by little I posted more, and I started using hashtags, and it slowly started to build, and I was like, oh my god, people actually want to see this, how cool. And then just started posting more and more until luckily, before all the crazy Instagram algorithms came into place, I was able to get a lot of you to follow me, which is so nice.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the algorithm thing, because I feel like, yeah, there was like this perfect time to get in and just like accidentally start an Instagram, whereas I feel like now people joining, like there aren't as many accidents that way as there were in
Yeah, there are a
back in
lot
the
more
day.
hurdles, and you have to be so like calculated, because if not, Instagram won't share your stuff with other people, and it's very frustrating, but you just learn to work with it and roll with it.
Yeah. Well, I feel like your account has like a pretty specific style and you've really honed in on all of that. And I mean, you play with like a million different things, but they all kind of like,
Yeah,
if you see it, you can tell that it's done by you. So, and I know that you're going to show us a couple of those different techniques. So why don't we just flip your camera right over onto your hands and we can get started.
awesome. Let's do it. So the first technique I'm going to show you today is Fauxligraphy, or a faux calligraphy, where you use a monoline tool or something that doesn't have a flexible nib in order to create a calligraphy style with thicks and thins. So there are 2 simple rules when creating Fauxligraphy. Whenever you have a monoline letter, and that's just any letter with no varying widths, so every stroke in there is completely one thickness. Anytime you have an upstroke or you move your hand upwards, you're going to leave that thin. And anytime you move your hand downwards in a downwards motion, you're going to make that stroke a little thicker. So you're going to add an extra line parallel to it and then close it off. And that will create your fauxligraphy, or act like you used a flexible nib to go ahead and create those thicks and thins. So let's see what that looks like again, but a little closer up. This time I'm going to do a script letter. And so we had our upstrokes coming through here. We start curving down on this stroke right here. So that's where we're going to go ahead and make the lines a little thicker and fill that in. And if you choose to, you can always leave them unfilled as well. I do that all the time. It's just a style choice. So here we start again, an upstroke, our downstroke here. And then since we're curving back up here, we're going to end that right there. And fill that in. And then we can do one more block. Let's try the letter C. Another very simple one. Again, we're going up here, so we leave that thin, coming back down here. And then we taper that off here since we're going back up. All right, so now that we've gone through the basic steps, I'm going to go and run through an entire alphabet a little quicker so you can see how those look like. So here's a completed alphabet of both script and block letters. And regardless if you're doing uppercase or lowercase in script or block or whatever style you have, the principles will stay the same. Your upstrokes, remember, anytime you move your pen up, will stay thin, and your downstrokes, anytime you move your marker down, your pen or pencil, those are going to get thicker. And now you see these are, as long as there's a contrast between thick and thin, you're fine. You don't have to have super thin thins and like really thick thicks. It's just as long as there's a variation between the two, you're good on the Fauxligraphy. All right, so let's jump into the second technique, which is blending water-based markers. I'll be using my Karen brush markers today. I love these. I take these on the go with me and I use them at home. So they're just like a whole bunch of juicy water-based ink in there. All right, so you always want to start with a light color. I typically do yellows or pinks to start with, and then blend it with a blue because the transitions between the blue and yellow will be the green in between. You can do pinks and purples, pinks and blues, which will give you the purples in between. Just think about any color combinations that you can create and, try out any sort of 2 different colors because you'd be surprised what can combine. So we're gonna take our yellow marker, and because I'd rather not directly add color to the page, I actually typically use a plastic bag, or you can even use palette paper if you can find that because it's nice and smooth. And we're going to add some ink onto whatever surface you're using, whether it be a plastic bag or your palette paper. So I'm going to put some ink down and pick up my water brush. I'm using a Tim Holtz water brush. It's one of my favorites just because I like the short tip, so it's a little easier to control. And we're going to pick up that ink, and I'm just going to do a simple hi. Just say hello. And this is where you can use your Fauxligraphy. Instead of using your brush pen or your water brush pen and adding pressure to it to do thicks and thins, it could be a little easier to just use Fauxligraphy to, sorry, I keep losing it. Apology for my pausing. You can use it to do your thicks and thins. So you can create bolder, thicker letters, which it's a little easier to blend with versus something really thin. Let's do a quick hello. Okay, so now that I have my word down, and notice I use Fauxligraphy, here's my thin strokes and then my thicker strokes. I'm going to add my second color, or the darker color, down to this plastic. The reason we do this is because if you were to put the dark color down first and try to add the yellow on top after that, it wouldn't really blend well and it kind of just all mush together. You need to make sure you're going from light to dark, which will make it a little easier. Okay, so I have a paper towel here to kind of clean off my brush and get that yellow off. We're going to pick up some of that blue. And I like to do blends from top to bottom, but you can experiment and do from left to right, bottom to top. And we're going to start adding it to the top. And because I just loaded it with the blue and the blue's so dark right now, I'm gonna try to get to all the tops. So that way I'm not doing it all in one stroke because then it'd just be super, super dark blue going down. So we're gonna kind of go horizontally across first. And then what I'm gonna do now is clean off some of that blue so I'm not continuing to drag a massive amount of blue down. And then just start pulling that darker color down, that blue. And as you can see, because I'm gonna continue to clean it off, so that way I'm not, again, pushing too much down because you don't want the yellow to completely disappear. You just want it to start blending and eventually it will fade as we get lower. So cleaning that brush off and making it a little drier helps with that. Continue to clean off and just push it down. Okay, and now we've made it all the way down. And because we've continued again to clean off the brush, you get a slow gradient coming down versus just like a big mass and like a huge like blue line that'll kind of separate the yellow from the blue. And say you're like, oh, I want to push it down a little further. You know, I want the blue to come down a little more. I want it a little darker on the top. That's totally fine. Make sure your your brush is completely clean. Pick up some more of that blue and you can just start over again. The great thing about this technique is because you're not directly applying the water-based marker to the paper, it dries really fast. So you can just continue to work on top of it without worrying about damaging your first layer. Here we go. Continue to clean off. And if you've noticed, because I'm using a water brush, the water is in here, so it's constantly feeding a little bit of water to the tip. So I don't have to like continuously dip into water and then worry about how much water it is. Because when you're blending, if you have too much water either gushing out or if you're using a traditional brush and trying to keep it wet, if it's too wet, it tends to get splotchy and the blend won't look as seamless. You'll be able to see like where the water kind of stopped. You'll have water lines in it. So always want to make sure it's almost dry, but not quite. That's typically how I found success with water brushes and all this blending. I just want to add a little more blue here. And if for some reason you've pushed too much color down and you're like, oh no, I'm missing some of the yellow, don't worry. Once it dries, go ahead and just start some yellow and make sure your brush is clean. Pick up some of that yellow and you can always start adding it to the bottom and pushing up instead. So you can always add some of that light color back in to make it a little brighter. And all this comes with just a matter of practice and blending different colors. It's a very simple technique, and because you only need a few tools, you just need a couple markers, some plastic, a paper towel, and some paper. It's a great way to do watercolor on the go because you don't need very many tools. You don't have to carry around like a big palette and that you have to worry about getting wet everywhere. And I'm always just touching up constantly. It is a very time-consuming technique if you're doing like a lot of words, but I think the final product is definitely worth it. Alrighty, and there is a nice blended from blue to yellow, only using 2 markers. All right, so our third and final technique is going to be offset lettering. If you've never heard of it, it looks kind of something like this, and I'll show you how to accomplish this technique. So we're going to go back to the blended high that I created. It's nice and bold, which works really well with the technique. You can do skinnier letters, but because, as you can see here, you have to have a lot of room. It tends to look a little nicer if you have nice, thick, bold letters. Okay, so I have a sheet of tracing paper with me and a pencil. So the offset lettering technique is essentially, let me bring this back here, is essentially an outline of the letter, kind of offset or pushed to the side and maybe a little up. So the way to kind of wrap your head around where those strokes are going to go is going to be by using some tracing paper. So first, grab your pencil and trace your letter. All right, so we have the outline of the word. The offset technique is essentially you offsetting this outline. So you're going to nudge it a little bit to the left and a little bit up. This is the way that I tend to do it, but you can just as easily nudge it to the right and a little bit up, reset it, or you can nudge it to the left and a little bit down. Same thing, you can always nudge it to the right and a little bit down. Essentially, you just want to have a little bit of that negative space around each letter. How can you practice this? Of course, moving your tracing paper. If you move it a little too far, sometimes it's a little difficult to read the word. And if you don't move it enough, you don't really see enough of the negative space for it to pop. So you kind of want to find the best width, and you'll get that through practice. And luckily with your tracing paper, all you have to do is kind of move it around so you can kind of see what you think would work best. And now, in order to transfer this, let's go ahead and grab your tracing paper. And then you want to have like a scrap sheet that you can kind of turn it over on. And you're going to go ahead and trace it on the back as well. And when I'm tracing, I tend to use a traditional pencil and not a mechanical pencil because I tend to like to press down really hard. Mechanical pencils tend to break a lot easier. So the reason we have this scrap paper is because when you trace the back, of course, it transfers it down. So you don't want to damage, your piece with any, stray pencil marks. So now that you have both sides traced in pencil, let's put it over the word again. And say the way that I typically do it is slightly to the left and slightly above. You can kind of see where that is, and then go ahead and trace the front outline again. And this will transfer the pencil that you just added to the back down onto your paper. This will help you kind of learn the technique without having to worry about, oh my goodness, where's each stroke going to go? Because as you go, it kind of gets lost. It's a little confusing. And this way, you have an entirely offset stroke for each letter on top. And you can go ahead and grab any pen that you want and trace it. Right now, I tend to like using fountain pens. I like the tips, but you can use any sort of dark marker or really any color. It's really fun to experiment. All right, and now we have our offset piece.
So Veronica, that tracing paper tip is like super helpful for people, I think. But I know that, and I've seen you do it on Instagram, and you don't use the tracing paper. So is that just something like over time you get used to exactly what angle you should be like moving things over and how to draw those letters? Like you just get good at it over time and don't need to do the tracing paper technique?
Yeah, exactly. After some time, as you're tracing your pencil lines, you'll kind of learn that when you're doing it, at least in this direction, every horizontal stroke ends up being up on the left side, and any vertical stroke ends up on the left side, and any horizontal will end up on top. So as you're tracing, just be conscious of where that's going, and eventually you'll be able to do it freehand too. And don't worry, I get, tripped up sometimes and I'm like, oh no. But because the technique is just so loose and fun, even if you kind of mess up and one line goes a little too far, left, right, up or down, it honestly will look just fine. For the most part, it's just such a forgiving technique because of the way that it's created that it will look great no matter what. But yeah, you'll definitely, after some practice can do it freehand.
Well, thanks for those little lessons. I think those are going to be really fun for people and like approachable. They're approachable art, but by the end, I didn't realize that all three of them were going to fit together into one piece. So I think that's like it's encouraging that you'll actually be able to kind of complete something at the end of it. So that was awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to share, any techniques that I can. And I just love to encourage people to just get creative. Don't ever be intimidated. Of course, you have a lot of big Instagram people, but, we have been doing it for so long now that, of course, it's going to look easy, but a lot of times we're messing up and it still takes us a few attempts. So I just love to share as much as possible to get people to at least to get started and be like, you can totally do this. Look at, it's once you break stuff down, it's way more approachable. And I really appreciate you letting me, share that little bit with everyone so they can get started too.
Yeah, awesome. So where can people most easily find you?
All right. So I'm pretty much on Instagram every day at Veronica Letters. And then I do have a YouTube channel, which is Veronica Letters as well. Getting back into updating that one more regularly. Those are the two spots where I'll definitely be able to interact with you.
Awesome. Sounds good. So we'll make sure everybody has followed you there and they can definitely see some more of that offset lettering and all the blending and stuff like that. And just one final reminder to anybody who's watching, if you haven't commented yet, just make sure you comment below and you'll be entered in a giveaway for some brush pens. Not that we used any brush pens in this lesson, but I think everybody could use more brush pens in their life.
We did, but now you learn how to use brush pens in a whole new way. You don't need to use them directly.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you again so much, Veronica, for coming on here. And I guess we will talk to you later.
Thanks for having me.